All right. Good day, everybody. Great to have such a nice crowd with us. Very pleased to be joined by David Kapka and Seth Green here, and excited to partner with FERC D2SI to bring you this industry open webinar dedicated to Part 12D summary observations and lessons learned for year two. I'm going to introduce Seth Green here in just a moment, but before I do that, we've blocked off 90 minutes on your calendars. Dave just mentioned to us that if the discussion or Q&A goes long, he's prepared to stay on till 3 p.m. Eastern if required. So we'll just keep that in mind. He did ask if we could hold our questions until he's through his presentation. That would be appreciated. I would encourage everybody to use the chat function. So if you've got thoughts, questions that come up throughout, please put them in the chat, and we'll take them in order here when Dave gets through his slides. With that said, just want to acknowledge a few folks here on the line. So just want to recognize the leadership of our Chief Dam Safety Engineers Roundtable group here at NHA. So Jillian Lawrence from Hull Street Energy, Nick Van Gerstorff from Southern California Edison. I know Brent Sullivan is on here from Pacificor, and of course Seth Green from Alabama Power. And then once more, Seth Green also serves as our hydroelectric power committee, or community, I should say, dam safety chairperson. So he wears two hats with us. Seth, thanks for being here. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Before we get going today, wanted to introduce myself, the NHA group, hydropower technical community, a little bit about what we do. So as Chris mentioned, my name's Seth Green. I work for Southern Company, currently the Chief Dam Safety Engineer for Alabama Power projects, serving NHA's hydropower technical community as Vice Chair this year. And for those of you who aren't terribly familiar with HTC, it's the technical arm of NHA. So dealing with things like asset management, operations, dam safety, water management, etc. Within the HTC, we've got the Dam Safety Subcommittee, like Chris mentioned, chaired by Jillian and Nick. Dam Safety Subcommittee helps support the dam safety industry initiatives, like things like this webinar. Help support NHA's Clean Currents, which is the technical conference held every year in mid-October. This year will be in Pittsburgh. And most recently, Dam Safety Subcommittees organized an owners-only group of dam safety engineers that we call the CDSE Roundtable. So if you're interested in any of these items, want to get more involved in the roundtable or come to Clean Currents, feel free to reach out to myself or Chris or Jillian or Nick. So with that, our speaker today really needs no introduction, but I will set the stage anyway. It's been a couple years since FERC revised the guidelines surrounding Part 12 independent inspection process, moving from a 5-year independent consultant inspection to alternate between periodic inspections and comprehensive assessments every 5 years. So today, Mr. Dave Kapka joins us, the director of FERC's Division of Dam Safety and Inspections out of Washington, D.C. headquarters office. to give us kind of an update on how we're looking on the Part 12 process and comprehensive assessments a few years in. Dave?
Okay, thanks, Seth. Appreciate the intro. And yeah, so I'll be going through a presentation that we've put together based on, kind of some stats that we've put together and findings from the first couple years worth of CAs. We're going to be focused on the CAs today. I will confess, I don't have as much firsthand experience as I would like. I have been tied up with a lot of other program stuff that's not project related over the past year and a half, and including the last 3 months, especially. So this is info that we've put together, and I've gotten feedback from our staff and some consultants as well. So a lot of you on this call will actually have even more information than I do on certain things. But I think this is a good way for us to share what we're thinking, solicit some feedback from you all. And then, as Chris said, after I'm done presenting, we can go through Q&A. And I got a hard stop at 3 Eastern, but I can stay on until then. So with that, I will get to my presentation. All right. So as Chris and Seth kind of introduced, this is kind of our observations, lessons learned of the CAs over the past 2 years. The outline, just go through background, kind of refresh people, why we're here, and then get into kind of the meat of the presentation. So back in April of 22, we did revise formally 18 CFR 12, which is the regulations for dam safety at FERC. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the subpart D, so that's why we call it Part 12D, independent consultant inspections. So we used to do a 5-year cycle of a specific type of inspection. And now we're doing a 5-year alternating cycle of 2 types of inspections. So the periodic inspection is more of a performance-based, focused inspection of the project features and how the dam has performed since the last independent consultant inspection. And then the CA, the comprehensive assessment, is the deep dive. That's what we're here to talk about today. It's a more involved effort than our previous process. And the PI is expected to be less involved. And it has a less of a scope. But all that being said, every project's different, every team's different, all that stuff, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Just a table of what's required in each of them. So in the middle is what we used to require. So the periodic inspection does not require evaluations of studies and analyses of record. That's a big effort in every IC inspection. So that is a major change in scope, reduction in scope. And then there's no requirement for the review of the STID or performing a PFMA. Also 2 large reductions in scope. We did add the review of the owner's dam safety program as part of that. But that isn't a huge heavy lift in most cases. But then with the comprehensive assessment, you can see the additional item at the bottom, performing the risk analysis, right? What we call an L2RA, level 2 risk analysis. It's a semi-quantitative risk analysis, but that is a massive change from what we used to require. So that is definitely an increase in scope. So then going through it, we try to develop our milestones for kind of how we go through the process. You can see on the left what we used to have, and on the right is what we have now. So we've added the requirement for a Part 12D inspection plan, and that is for a PI or a CA. And that is for us to understand, more comprehensively, what is the plan? Who's going to be doing the inspection, right? We used to just get the resume of the independent consultant. Now we have an independent consultant team that's required. So we do need more definition in an inspection plan so that we can better assess, and licensees can better assess who and what are needed best for their project. And then we also have a requirement for a pre-inspection preparation report. PIPR is what we affectionately term it. And that's an important step. And it's not a waste of time. It's not unnecessary effort. It is effort that's going to be required anyway. And we want it done ahead of the actual field inspection and all the, other aspects of the inspection, the PFMA and et cetera. That way we know that the inspection team is ready, that they've reviewed everything they need to review, and they're prepared for when they get out and do the inspection and then do the PFMA and the L2RA. Too many times in the past, we had found that the IC would come to the inspection basically not having prepared, and it often resulted in some kind of awkward moments about whether or not the inspection ought to continue or be canceled. And it just resulted in a less effective inspection, which is the main point. So by adding this requirement, yes, it's another step. It's another filing for FERC to review. But we also, most of that information can be put right into the final report. An update, of course, if necessary, based on the actual comprehensive assessment process. And then at the bottom there, we also require a CA review meeting. So that's a new requirement. It's also meant to have the ability for the IC team, the licensee, and FERC to talk before the plan and schedule for addressing recommendations is issued, just in case there's some necessary clarifications, questions, et cetera, on anybody's end. That's where that meeting we feel is valuable for that. So here's the stats on how many projects fall under the Part 12D program. It is not all the projects that FERC regulates, but it's a lot, right? So 724 projects, of which are owned by 261 different licensees. So on a 10-year cycle, we're looking at approximately 72 CAs per year when we get up to the steady state, which we are not there yet. And I'll show some numbers upcoming on how many we are doing and how many are projected in the coming years. But we are still in the ramp up phase for the CA. So for now, for the current FY fiscal year, and subsequent years and previous years, we've been doing more periodic inspections than comprehensive assessments. And that was for a lot of reasons, trying to accommodate industry, having to ramp up resources on their end, trying to accommodate FERC, trying to get additional resources on our end to accomplish the increased workload that the CAs do provide, and as well as getting enough folks trained up on the risk analysis front, since that is a new feature, and it's a different piece of work. So there are different requirements on knowledge base and experience, et cetera, and training on that. So, and this is just life in the United States, at least most parts of the U.S. Approximately 80% of the reports are due in October, November, December. And that's because you can't do site inspections in the winter in a lot of the areas that our projects are located. So the window is compressed, and it gives us that rush of submittals and review meetings all a similar time. It's a scheduling, challenge, I guess I would say. So what's the current assessment of the CAs? So looking at it, and this is by fiscal year, so we're currently in FY25, but we're already getting things for FY26 and even FY27. So the reports that were due in FY24, there were 28 of those. We received 28 inspection plans. We accepted 28 inspection plans. We got 28 PIPers. And then we still have one project that has to finalize its PFMA L2RA. We're certainly working with that licensee and the IC team to work through that. There were extenuating circumstances on that one. We still have 2 reports that are to be submitted, and we did receive 25 reports and conducted 25 CA review meetings. So for the FY25 grouping, so you can see we ramp up from 28 to 40. We received and accepted 40 of the inspection plans, and the same, PIPers for that amount as well. We have 2 PFMA L2RAs still in progress. We have 8 reports that are yet to be submitted, but we have received 30 of the 40 reports to date. So if you add those 2 columns, you got 55 total reports that have been submitted to FERC. And of those 30 reports received, we've done 19 of the CA review meetings. So looking into the future, in FY26, there's going to be 42 CAs required. We've already received 35 inspection plans for those. We've accepted 32 of those, and we've received 7 of the PIPers already. And we have one underway, so that's where the pending CA report is. And obviously we haven't received any final report or anything, nor should we have. And then in FY27, you can see we have another big jump from 42 to 59. We've already received a couple of those plans and accepted them. We are, and I'll talk about this coming up, we are sending out reminder letters earlier at the request of licensees to try to help with the scheduling process for everybody. So that's why, even though it's FY27, a couple of them have already started with that process. All right, so this is kind of, doing the math of the previous slide a little bit. So we've received a total of 105 inspection plans. We've received 76 PIPers, 66 PFMA L2RAs have been completed to date, 55 CA reports have been received, and 44 CA review meetings have been conducted. So what are our thoughts at FERC? Especially compared to the previous process. We call them legacy Part 12s at this point. But so and this is comprehensive assessment, right? This is not periodic inspection. So the CAs, we do find, and this is how it was designed, it's a more comprehensive and intense process. There is a broader involvement and more technical disciplines that are part of the process. Licensees are getting a deeper review of their project records, better and more assessments of the records of the analyses of record and documents for the project. The expanded PFMA with the risk analysis, the risk analysis is the next step, basically in the old PFMA process. It does, and we'll get into this a little more, and I'm sure you've heard it if you've been through the process, it does help kind of with what do you do with all the PFMs that come out of a PFMA. Previously, we did what we did, but that was often difficult, to truly manage in a, you know, in a structured kind of manner. But in this, the L2RA really helps with that, and it really helps, provide that, consistent process across projects, across, a licensee's inventory, or even, our regional or our national inventory at FERC. There's more documentation required, and all these do result in larger teams, more time, and higher cost. Part of the higher cost was meant to be offset by the reduction in scope for the periodic inspections. But I don't think it is a one-to-one. I'm sure there's higher overall costs through the Part 12D process, because the scope is just larger, and it was set up that way. It needs to be that way, from what we found, and what others have found. This wasn't just a FERC thing. This was more or less dam safety industry best practice. So what we're seeing at a lot of the projects, is that there is a more thorough review, that does discover design, construction, and analysis deficiencies that were not previously caught. And that's the idea. I mean, you can read all the issuances that we had to put out through the rulemaking process. We had to justify everything that we've proposed and eventually was implemented. We had to address comments from the public and industry, et cetera. But if you go through it, one of the driving factors was too many things that could have been caught were not getting caught from the old Part 12 process. So this was meant to help reduce that as much as we could through a process. You still got to do it right. You still got to put the time in. You still got to get the right people involved. But we believe, and even talking to you all, the process is good. It's certainly not quick and easy, but it's good, and it's doing the job, up to date. So, we have found through the PFMA effort, and we did modify how that goes, slightly, and there have been additional PFMs that weren't not previously identified. And PFMAs have been around since, early 2000s at this point within the FERC, realm. So, you get 3 or 4 Part 12D processes, with the corresponding PFMAs. And we're still, this effort is finding additional ones that are not just, ho hum, some of them are critical. So, this is, I think, once again, kind of, showing that this is probably, working the way it needs to work. And then the risk analyses, this is going to be different, I think, for everybody, depending on your comfort, your experience with it over the years, your exposure to it. But we do see that the risk analyses that are being done do provide a better understanding of the project risks. And, I'll have some slides coming up to illustrate that a little bit as well. But it's just a lot easier to work through the PFMs when you have them, plotted on the risk chart. One thing that we have been surprised at is how what we call them the risk driving PFMs. So at any project, certain PFMs drive the risk the most, and they can be categorized, in many ways. But this is kind of how we've broken it down up to now. So it's basically 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 between flood, seismic, and normal loading. We do have the 1% for ice in there. But, by and large, it's pretty equal amongst the 3 dominant load cases. And I don't, I don't know that what I necessarily would have thought, but I don't think I would have thought that. So that's been interesting for us to kind of work through. And then getting into failure mechanisms, this is a little more of a breakdown, of course, but you've got, the big drivers are internal erosion and sliding. So that's a little surprising that concrete sliding is so high. Doesn't mean it's incorrect, but it is a little surprising. So we didn't break it down by what is the load case driving the failure mechanism. So I don't know if that's concrete sliding during seismic or from flood load or whatever, right? So we can spend many hours, and we have, trying to do a lot of this data analysis, and we'll continue to do that. But this is just kind of illustrative of what we're doing with the information that we're getting from the L2RAs, and it will help us to then develop priorities for additional guidance, additional training, whether it's internal or external, additional focus to push out to licensees and consultants on, hey, this is what we're seeing with our large inventory, right? I mean, we're starting to see a lot of inventory versus other of these efforts, I mean, these data are going to be, I think, important for the industry to see what we're finding. Assuming we're going to verify that we believe in the validity of all these, of course, and in going through these processes, there's no reason to not. But it still, shows you internal erosion is still a big deal, and it will always be a big deal for embankments and projects on, soil foundations, et cetera.
Dave, it's Chris here.
Yeah.
We lost your slides. I don't know what happened, but
Oh,
just reshare your screen. Yeah.
can you see them now or not?
I
No.
can't.
All right,
Yeah.
let me see what, I don't know what happened.
Well, that's okay.
I don't think
Stuff
I clicked it.
Yeah, sometimes it does what it wants.
Do you know what slide you,
It's
I
back.
think-
what's that?
This
It's
is
back.
Joel. It's back.
Yeah.
I know, but do you
Yeah.
know what slide you lost me on? Was it this one or a different one?
I think the next.
Yeah.
You're good now.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah.
Sure. All right. So I think I talked through this one, just the various failure mechanisms. And there's obviously a million different ways to slice any data, right? So we'll continue to look at this stuff as we get more data as well, and just even with the data that we have. One thing that the IC teams haven't really spoken too much, even though it's been clear it's an issue at a lot of our projects, is non-breach life safety risk. So, this is the scenario where the dam either operates perfectly, or, there's an issue, but it doesn't result in breach, but it does cause downstream flooding. So, a lot of our projects have a lot of spillway capacity, but there's also, populations at risk downstream, and they could have impacts. So, we have EAPs, we have high flow EAP notifications that our licensees are required to make when their discharges go out of bank, et cetera. So I think a lot of this risk is already addressed through those processes. Certainly we've seen over the past few years a lot of flooding downstream of dams, not always FERC dams, but dams period, that cause, flooding in residences, et cetera. But most of those have been warned, and most of those folks have been, have gotten out of harm's way. But this just illustrates, I think, a little more clearly that this is not an insignificant issue. Where we have for the project, and this is actual data. I'm not going to tell you what projects they are, but we do have a project. Well, 1 in 10 flood could result in fatalities. So it is critical for that licensee to make sure their EAP is up to date, that it has the right triggers, and that the folks have the warning time they need. Just because your project isn't failing doesn't mean there isn't something you have to do to help with the downstream impacts. And it also doesn't mean the licensee is liable. It's just, let's get those people out of harm's way and make sure that they're properly warned. So this just, once again, I think re-highlights that clearly on a chart that is understandable by most folks in our industry. And project by project, these will be comments we have to the IC teams. Hey, what about recommendations for this? How do you cover it? It's like I said, it's something that I think we are pretty well covered through our EAP process, through the high flow EAP, part of the process. But it's still, once again, further just drives that point home that, there are projects, and once again, it's not just FERC projects, it's dams that have to release during flood events. There can be impacts downstream. So the key is the life safety aspect of it, to make sure that, the steps are in place to make sure that there's, the folks are warned in time to at least, reduce the chance of anybody losing their life or being injured. Similarly, this is the financial damage state risk summary by project. We're not getting a lot of recommendations in the CA reports related to these yet either. We do just want to point out, some of these PFMs can have large financial consequences, whether or not there's, potential life loss, and they may warrant, risk reduction measures, depending on whose financial loss it is, and how critical, whatever feature it is that's being damaged, and how difficult it is to get it back and to get it repaired. So, the example I always have in my mind is Wanapum Dam. That spillway incident did not result in a breach, but it resulted in a lot of economic loss to the licensee, and there were a lot of just other consequences, environmental, PR, et cetera, to where, if that licensee had known what was going to happened exactly like it did, and that the dam wasn't going to breach and no one was going to die, I guarantee you they still would have done something to prevent that incident. So that's the type of thing we're trying to get to from this effort. So just because project doesn't breach or there's no life loss potential doesn't mean, you ought not consider actions to reduce the risk. And then, so another thing, when when these are being plotted up on the risk charts through the L2RA, you can see on this chart the various, circles there are the actual potential failure modes themselves plotted. And then the red box is, the actual risk, the comprehensive risk at that project. So you can just see basically how those things can sum up to provide that total risk. And then, you can also see what PFMs, as you address them, how that risk, for the project overall changes. So those are important things to consider. So for many projects, the comprehensive assessment efforts and results, they have revised the understanding of the project. And they are kind of driving different actions based on new issues that were identified, maybe reducing concerns for existing issues, based on, hey, we thought that was the big deal here. It's actually not as big a deal as this other thing. So the more you learn, the better. We have had a few projects where licensees come up to us after the fact and said, we didn't learn a thing. We know what we knew. There's nothing new from this process that we gained. And I would say they should be celebrating, right? I mean, you've gone through the, I guess the best practice within dam safety for these types of inspections. Other agencies do these things as well, not just for, and by going through the standard of practice, that you've actually confirmed that your project doesn't have issues that you didn't know about, I would not be upset with that. I would be very happy with that. And would actually make me sleep easier at night. So, but, I suppose the other side of the coin is, well, I spent all this extra money and I just found out what I already knew. Well, like I said, I don't think, first of all, you don't know that ahead of time. And like I said, second of all, that just gives you more confidence in what you've got and what you know. So internally at FERC, what are our challenges with the new stuff? It has been a greater time commitment for us than we originally anticipated. So we've got to prepare and coordinate all these calls for the PFMA L2RA session. The L2RA is new for us as well. And also the CA review meeting is a new item as well. Obviously the participation for us, and we're at each of these. There's just a lot of staff time devoted to it. We feel it's super important for us to be there, for a lot of reasons, to understand what's happening, to understand the project better, to help with the process if there's questions, for our staff to be trained up because this is new for our staff. All these different reasons is why we're there at these. But it's a challenge. It's a resource constraint for sure. And then we've got additional document reviews, and we'll go through some stats on, how are we doing at FERC on some of this in some slides upcoming. We are, though, I think, delivering timely reviews. We are, we've had an internal goal to respond to inspection plans within 30 days. We're meeting that in almost every case right now. The PIPers, we have a requirement that we have to respond within 14 days if it's deficient. And for the ones that have been deficient, we've met that goal. And then the initial CA report, we have to do our initial review within 30 to 40 days of submittal so that we can be ready for the CA review meeting. And we've been spot on with that. And then the initial CA report review, we do send a response letter on the initial review, and we're also hitting the mark there. The final review, review of the final report, that has been a challenge. And I'll show you the stats coming up. But these other things, are, taking priority. Other items that come up take priority. So it's not that things aren't being accomplished, and it's not that things are sitting, not being looked at all. It's just the process is different than it used to be. So not having a final review letter from FERC is not the same as it used to be, right? You've gotten already initial feedback from us. You've gotten all these inspection plans reviewed by us and commented on by us. You've had us at these sessions the whole time. So that's something different than it used to be, where until you got that final review, you didn't necessarily have any real idea of how it was going to be received by FERC. So, we've tried to make additional, kind of checks for us to make sure that we're tracking with you all, make sure we're getting input. We don't want any more than you want a big show-stopping comment in a final review, right? And we don't want that any more than you guys do. So this is, we tried to develop processes to make sure that all that stuff gets addressed earlier if possible. All right, so we'll go through in detail the CA tasks here. We'll talk about the reminder letters, inspection plans, the PIPers, site inspection, PFMA, L2As, the CA reports, the review meetings, and then plan and schedules. So initially, we were having the ROs send the reminder letters approximately 18 months before the CA reports were due. We got overwhelming feedback from licensees that wasn't enough time in most cases. So we are now trying to do it at least 24 months prior to the report due date. And we've heard positive things from licensees when we modified that. So the inspection plans, they're there. As I was saying, we want the project understanding and setting to be defined. We need the licensee and their team to assess the technical disciplines that are going to be required. The team members and their qualifications have to be identified. Independence of the team members has to be verified, and then the schedule has to be established in it. This is just the part out of our regs, which require the 180 days prior to performing it is when the inspection plan is due. And I think by and large, most of the submittals we've gotten to date are meeting that. We've made very few exceptions and only for extremely good justification, and almost never on a CA. I don't ever talk in certainty anymore. Being in the job I've been in long enough, I always have to give everybody some wiggle room. There's never a perfectly definitive something on anything, but the 180 days as close to a red line as we're going to get. So, you got to meet that. And if you don't, you better have amazing justification for us to relax it. And it's probably not going to be the case if it's a CA. All right, so here's some stats on how the CA inspection plans have come in and what the review resultant is. So you can see the early set of reports, and I presented this last year if you guys were on that one. So you may or may not remember these numbers, but so the FY24, the submittal got to us more or less about a year ahead of when the report was due. We did have some, as you can see, below the 6-month requirement, and we had to work with those, and some of those schedules had to be adjusted. But you can see as time has marched on, we've gotten, we've been sending out the reminder letters a little earlier, and the average has been growing, which is good. That means we've been getting the reports sooner, and there hasn't been a rush in most cases. You can see the minimum there is over the 180 days for all of these since FY24. So what did we do with those reports? Well, in FY24, we accepted one of them with no comment. You're good to go. 3 of them we conditionally accepted with minor comments that did not need resubmittal. And then 24 of them, we required additional submittals to address comments that we had. So then you can see, how we worked from there. So 18 of them were addressed. 18 of the 24 were addressed right away with the next submittal. 5 of those required one more, and then one of them required three submittals. to address all the comments. That's unfortunate, of course. None of us want to go back and forth that many times. And we're not yet, again, hitting the third, but we are hitting too many on the FY25. So you can see we accepted 3 with no comments in FY25, but we had 37 that had to have additional submittals to address comments that we had. 28 of those were addressed with the first go around, and then 9 of those required another one. So, I mean, my only recommendation would be, you know, when you get a comment letter from us that doesn't accept your inspection plan, and if it's not clear to you what we need, call us up, talk to us about it. I think a lot of them are pretty clear what we need after the fact. We try to put it in the letter that we send to you, what we're looking for. But if there's questions in your mind or in your IC team's mind, reach out so we don't have to go back and forth a million times. And then you can see the FY26, we're still kind of in that same ballpark. Not too many are just accepted right away. Most of them do have to have a resubmittal. Hopefully we don't, you know, hopefully we can get that resubmittal number 2, get those numbers eliminated going forward. But every project's different. And every inspection plan isn't the same. And, you know, some, some IC teams, you know, are new versus ones that have been doing it. But we definitely would have expected to have, you know, improved, if you will, over the last year or so. So then how quick is FERC turning stuff around on these? So this is timing on how many days from when we get the inspection plan to when we issue our letter. So you can see in FY24, you know, this was a totally new process for us as well. We had to stand up. We had to get a lot more people involved, both at the headquarters and the regional office levels to review it. So you can see we did turn around one in 8 days. The average was 47. And as I mentioned earlier, my goal was 30. And then we had one that took 148 days to turn around. I forget the specifics on that one, but still, you know, it was definitely longer turnaround time than we wanted. However, when the subsequent responses came in, you know, the ones requiring additional submittals, we were on average turning those around in 18 days. So much better there. So you can see in FY25, we improved a lot. Our average was down to 23 days. So we're meeting my goal of 30. The 107-day one, you know, they had submitted that in plenty of time. It did not affect the schedule at all. So that was one that, you know, yes, it looks bad on the table, but it wasn't in reality. It didn't cause issues. And so you can also see on the turnaround times for the resubmittals, we've gotten some turned around in 2 days, which is pretty much as quick as we can do it. On average, it's 2 weeks for us. And then we've had, you know, up to, you know, 41 days there. And then FY26, you can read the numbers, but the key there is, you know, our average is the 22 days. So we're keeping the average under 30. The max is no longer triple digits. And then, you know, we're still able to turn around the resubmittals pretty quickly. And then the FY27, those reports are so far out. You know, those numbers are what they are, but they are not prioritized for us. We're prioritizing other things. So we know those aren't time sensitive. So that's why those numbers have bumped up a little bit. But once we get the bulk of the 27s in, I am sure you will see those numbers go back to more or less what they were in the last couple of years. So, you know, just like I said, we are surprised at the low acceptance rate. I don't think we're being overly critical and, and just being, too nitpicky on things. I do, believe it or not, I review every letter that goes out on these CAs and PIs. And I have not seen us make nitpicky comments. Others may disagree, but at least the ones that I've seen everyone. I don't think they're too nitpicky. So I think it's just, the teams or the licensee is not, just going through the guideline to put in there what we need, or, there's just might be something that they didn't think about that we did catch, that we need. So and I said this last year, I'll say it every year, go to chapter 16, section 16.3 and follow it. That ought to result in us being able to approve things pretty easily. A lot of times there isn't a lot of information included on the project features and the setting. So that's one deficiency that we see broadly. We also, we don't always see discussion of past or ongoing studies or incidents that have occurred. And we also just, we need to have the technical disciplines identified, based on the project and all the features. And sometimes that's just not clear from the plan that was submitted. So same thing here. Sometimes an IC team member is going to serve several disciplines: civil, structural, H&H, mechanical, et cetera. Geotech being also the geology SME, but the resume only shows geotech and no geology. That's something that we see a lot. And yes, geotech and geology are, related, but it's not the same. I'm a geotech. I am not a geologist, nor could I serve as a geologic SME. So we do need to make sure that the IC team member who's being proposed for that discipline has something in the resume indicating that they do have the required expertise. So, and I think that's usually clear. It's just, yeah, but this guy or this gal has done a lot of these. You should know who they are. And, we're trying to just say, look, just submit the resume. Just give us what we need so we can just sign off on it. Yes, we may know that person. We may understand their qualifications, but not everybody. We've got a lot more people involved in the review process in D2SI, and not everybody has interfaced with every IC, even the ICs that do a ton of work. So it's still, let's get the resumes to match up to what we need to show. All right, so here's the qualifications of the LTRA and PFMA facilitators. We're still enforcing these two. The LTRA facilitator has to have attended an SQRA workshop or equivalent, and attended an SQRA facilitator training workshop, or equivalent, right? So we no longer are seeing a lack of, I guess, resources within the consulting community. It does seem like enough folks have been through these trainings. We've got well over 100 now that are qualified to be L2RA facilitators. So it's no longer the bottleneck it was the first year. So that's good. I think we do have a lot larger bench that we can pull from for these. You guys as licensees have more options to choose from, and more availability for scheduling, right? I mean, scheduling is always a challenge on this stuff. And as this is, the risk analysis experience does not substitute for the training requirements. So once again, there's plenty of people who've gotten the training as well. So if you want to use somebody who doesn't have the training, then they need to get it. or you're gonna have to pick somebody else. Also conflicts of interest, we still, I mean, that's the case in a lot of, just the community we deal with, right? Small. And so a lot of the consultants have worked on a lot of projects. So we definitely understand that we're not going to be getting IC teams that have never seen this dam before, but you got to lay out in the plan how to ensure that they don't have a conflict of interest for their portion of that work. They can't be reviewing things that they've done. I mean, that's the bottom line. So that's important, and we don't see that always clearly addressed. And sometimes that is the reason for us rejecting. It's a quick, hey, we don't see the conflict of interest statement here. You need to provide how that the conflicts aren't in place, or where they might be, how are you firewalling them? So it's worked through on everyone so far. So it's not the end of the world, but it's definitely something that is lacking in a lot of the initial plans. Project schedule is important. We got to have the dates. It's for us, it's for you. We need to schedule, the rhythm branch that Doug Boyer heads. It's a challenge for them to get to all the L2RAs, so we need to know the dates as these come in so that they can schedule, so we have somebody there. And then, sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes the plans aren't submitted in time, the 180-day thing. So we need to know who's going to participate in the inspection when you submit the inspection plan. And if they won't be, you need to identify how their specialty is being covered during the inspection. We do see this a lot. So you've got your IC team, you've got the SMEs for the various disciplines, but member X won't be at the site inspection. Well, that might be okay, but who's then covering what they should be looking at? So the inspection plan has to go through that. Now the PIPR, once again, that is a new thing for everybody. It's meant to be, an assistance, a help to the IC team. The licensees got to provide them the information that they need to review everything ahead of time, prepare that report. That report can more or less be moved into the final report with any updates from the actual CA process. But we need to know that folks have done the legwork ahead of time. So at least 30 days prior to the performance of the PI or CA is when the PIPR is due. And we, like I said, we consider it more or less pre-writing portions of the final report. And we've made the table of contents to mirror what the final report's going to need. So it's you're easily able to see what lines up where. So here's some stats on the PIPRs. So in 24, we accepted 20 with no comments. We had 5 that we had comments, but we did not require resubmittal. And then we had 3 that we required a resubmittal. 25, similar. And then 26, that's further out. There's not a time crunch, but, there's still one that we've not accepted. So it's important because, if we don't accept it, there's a very short period of time to get it addressed in order to keep the inspection on track. So, just going through, a lot of it, when we reject it, it's because we have to. We do not want to reject these because we understand it's a big deal for us and for you all to reschedule a CA. So it is not what we want, and we are not going to reject it unless we have to reject it. So, but some of them do come in with hardly anything in them, and it's clear that the IC team hasn't at least done everything they needed to do. They've done some things, but not everything, and we really need everything documented. So as you know, as it said earlier, you got 30 days is when it's due. So if you wait till the 30 days, which is obviously okay, FERC has 14 days to review and provide comment. So if you don't have any comment from us, it's good to go. You know, if you haven't heard from us after 14 days, you're good to go. If you hear from us, that means we have comment. And if we do provide comment that has to be addressed, then the IC team has only 16 days if they submitted it at the 30-day. So we've had 9 that have been inadequate. Those resulted in some scrambling from the IC teams and FERC staff to make sure, you know, we coordinated, told licensees exactly what we needed to see, what the IC teams needed to do in order to not have to reschedule things. And all of those were worked through, but it is not a fun process. So we don't really want to keep doing that. And then same thing here on the site inspection attendance. Like I said earlier, you know, we got to know who's going to be attending the inspection, and if somebody isn't, it needs to be laid out in the plan who would cover that discipline. All right, so the PFMA L2RAs, we're going to provide another webinar, you know, in the near future, where we'll get into some details on this. I'll talk through some higher level stuff. So we're seeing that the vast majority of the PFMAs are in person, and most of the L2RAs are virtual. And then all contingency activities have been virtual to date. About half have been using 2 facilitators for the PFMA L2RA, and almost half have been using 2 recorders. And then we're seeing more PFMs go into the L2RA than was expected, I guess. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. It just, you know, obviously has more work involved. So we're seeing the PFMA sessions range in duration from 1 to 6 with an average of just under 4 days. L2RAs have gone from 3.5 to 10. The average there is about 6 days. And, you know, we're seeing about half going longer than planned. And then some of these result in long delays to reschedule to get everybody back, you know, because everyone needs to be involved. So it has to be rescheduled to have everybody meeting. It does, and I think everyone's been doing a lot better job in just having these contingency days built in initially. So yeah, obviously there's a lot of factors in why the sessions are as long as they are. The first thing is they're meant to be extensive, you know. They're not meant to be 1 day each. And if they are, that better be the most straightforward dam that's ever been seen that's a high hazard, right? So they're meant to be intense and involved, you know, and so the experience of the SMEs matter. And when you're risk estimating, it helps with that process a lot. The facilitator is super important in getting things moving, keeping things going, making things as efficient as possible. Obviously, knowledge and understanding of the guidelines is important. Number of participants, the larger, the more time it's just going to take. That's just how it goes. And the project itself that's the biggest driver of everything. So we've seen in some cases where the facilitators and the risk team members aren't familiar with the PFM screening and risk estimating process. So this takes longer to work through. You know, I think these things will work themselves through as, you know, as the process becomes more and more ingrained in folks. So we do think the additional experience is going to help this a lot. And then additional risk training could help as well. Facilitator role is crucial. I think everyone has always heard that. It's the truth. If you sat through these, you know that. And we do see a great participation on the licensee side, by their dam safety and even their engineering operations staff. So I think by and large, the licensee staff has been, I wouldn't say better than expected, but very good. Prior training of the team, if that can be worked through, that's helpful. Walking through the process, examples, et cetera, so that you're not learning during the session. 2 recorders can help with efficiency in the AV stuff, note taking, et cetera. Facilities are always important. So you got to consider the number of folks and the room size and how things are set up to make the sessions go as well as they can. We still struggle with making sure we have the H&H stuff and the consequence analyses before starting the PFMA. We're currently having one that's going on currently while I'm talking that is having a challenge with this. They did not come prepared as they needed to. So that is causing delays. It's going to make the thing drag out longer than it had to. But for the most part, I think teams are understanding this. And then the risk understanding as well, the risk estimators, and we've put in there, it's not required, but strongly encouraged to attend the best practices in dam and levee safety risk analysis training that's put on by USSD and the Corps and Reclamation, although now I don't think they are with all the federal cuts that we're having. But it's important, to have folks take these training sessions. They are worth it. They really make the product better. So even just if you're a licensee soliciting resumes on who's taking this type of stuff, that's going to help the process. All right, so 55 CA reports to date. Most of them are acceptable for further review. So that means everything's more or less in place the way it needs to. They've got the required content and there's no missing information. We still could have final comments or comments on our final review, of course. But really, if we have obvious showstoppers, that's what we talk through in the CA review meeting or even ahead of it. We're not going to wait to send you a letter a year later saying, oh, by the way, here's all these big problems. That's not our goal. So, the communication is there for you all to ask, for the IC teams to ask, is there anything big? Certainly we may find things as we do our detailed review. We do independent analyses, things like that. So there always can be things that come up that we didn't foresee, but we're not just going to hold comments on big items just because. So hopefully that helps a little bit with unease about, hey, I submitted my CA a long time ago, I haven't heard, but we're still working through our process as well. So you can see in this table here, you can see the number of reports. We have 1 final CA report that we have completed to date, but we have 23 that's in our final review. So I do expect to be shaking some of these loose in the not too far off future. And once again, it's a learning curve for us as well. So you can just see where all these are. And then this is kind of the initial review. So we accepted 16 of the 28. We did require 9 of the CA reports to be revised, but they weren't big revisions. This was FY24. So similar in FY25, we have different stats because we're in different stages, but we still have already had 7 that we required to be revised. But they're relatively minor. Usually additional documentation is required, tables were left out, missing recommendations, and most of those reports have been revised and submitted within 60 to 90 days. haven't been massive issues to date. And so, the reports are strategically structured and organized to document the information. I mean, this is why we set it up like we did. The Pipper, is hopefully there to kind of pre-load some of this stuff. We tried to organize it the exact same way. And then in section 1 of the report is where, the IC team needs to make the case for that project. Here are the recommendations, here's what you got to do, or, however it might be. The framework for it, we look at the general conditions and performance evaluation is kind of the foundation. And then it moves up to evaluation, design, construction, and previous analyses. And then you go through the dam safety programs, the ODSP, the DSSMP, EAP, public safety plan, et cetera. Then up through spillway adequacy, evaluation of the STID, and then, the new analyses, the PFMAs, the L2RAs, and the DCIRC. So that's kind of how it's structured to build up as we go. And then we're, as still is the case, it's still early in the review process. We don't have like final conclusions on here's everything you need to know. But we do provide interim comments to the IC teams to try to help with preparation of future reports as well. The L2RAs, that one is new for most, of course. And a lot of times, the section 1.5.2 doesn't have what we're looking for in it. So, some of these items here, copy of the societal incremental life safety risk matrix, brief summary of the risk driving PFMs, haven't been included, and we need those included. So that's often a comment that's an easy revision for the team. And this is also where the dam safety case is to be made. We need assessment and recommendations to go along with the risk analysis. So this is where you kind of tell us, what does this all mean, and then what actions, if any, are necessary at that project. And here's additional discussion of the dam safety case. DCIRC, dam safety risk classification, this needs to be identified in the report. And then it needs to be justified, including discussion of how you arrived at it. So it's this table from our guidelines, from 1 to 5. So 1 being very high urgency of action, to 5 meaning no action required at that project for anything. So, the team has to work through these things after doing the L2RA. And then that helps guide, you as a licensee on how to prioritize and how urgent things need to be done, whatever, the findings might be and the recommendations. We want them tied to PFMs. So it's important, and most teams are doing pretty well with that. But we do want to once again point out, as you prioritize, or as the IC team recommends and prioritizes, and you as a licensee, do the same. The higher risk, the higher priority for that failure mode or that item. And then the same, the higher the urgency, the higher you get above that tolerable risk reference line. The L2RA is not a quantitative risk analysis. It doesn't answer all the questions, but it gives you an understanding of things that need to be dealt with or looked at further, and how critical it is to do it, sooner than later. Up to now, we've been using engineering judgment based on whatever the item is, whatever we think, they can wait till the next Part 12 to do that, or no, that needs to be done in the next 6 months or whatever. So the L2RA with the the risk plots for the PFMs, ought to help a lot of that with looking at the risk and the relative risk too within each of them to prioritize and to go through the urgency aspects. So, and this is, just other things that, the team needs to think through are interim risk reduction measures, any other non-structural recommendations, EAP is there anything to be done with non-breach risk that, can reduce the risk of that? Same thing, sections 3, 4, and 8, just make sure you're going through those. You're aligning them with the PIPR. And, depending on what the CA developed, the PIPR may not need to be revised too much based on the previous review done by the IC team. So here's the PFMA and risk analysis section. So it just, 7.5 and 7.6 should not be the place where risk evaluation and risk assessment information is documented. That needs to be in the report, the L2RA report, and then it also needs to be earlier on in making the case. Let's see, I'm trying to speed through the last few slides so that we have some time for Q&A. The L2RA report, we need to see summaries of the previous PFMAs, discussion of the project operations. The hydrologic loading is extremely important to make sure it's documented well, and oftentimes it's not. So it's just something to make sure you cover it with the IC team, make sure that they're providing what we're looking for. Consequences, we've gotten questions on what methodology is okay. Certainly the two main methodologies are RSIM and LifeSim. They are done differently. They have different benefits depending on a lot of factors. So it's key that you have whoever your consequence person is, that they understand where to best use the various methodologies. You can always reach out to the written branch if you have questions based on your project about which is okay to use. In some cases, and we've seen both, we've seen each of them used on projects. There isn't necessarily one that has to be done over another, but there are definitely, positives and negatives for each, and they need to be looked at specifically for the project that you have. The PFMs, and this is, once again, this is the L2RA report. So we don't have all the detailed justification that we always are looking for things. So you can see a couple examples here. Factor of safety is 1.46. There's adequate freeboard. Therefore, it's clearly negligible. That's pulled from one. So we did not find that was sufficient. So we asked for more information. And then the same thing, the team could not envision this PFM initiating, therefore it was judged to be negligible. We need a little more there. And then the risk analysis, these are above my level of expertise on a lot of this, but certainly, we need to have, the folks looking at these factors and documenting them as best they can. So failure likelihood, justifications, it's not always clear how those factors resulted in the selection of the likelihood category that they went with. So we oftentimes need a little more information on that. And then the evaluation of the risk estimates. So what's the incremental risk for the project and based on failure modes? We want to see, where are the consequence centers? How close are they? Is the AP, effective enough to help, with the non-breach stuff? So a lot of these things, I've talked about already. We have a table for the non-breach life safety risk. This is in chapter 18, but you can look through it. And if your project has these types of concerns with non-breach life safety, this is a table that ought to be completed and then looked at and evaluated. The CA review meeting, so we had 60 days, but we actually want within 30 to 45 days because the licensee's plan and schedule is due within 60. So we want to have this meeting ahead of that, so that can inform the plan and schedule that the licensee submits to us. It gives the licensee time to ask questions as well to the IC team. But this is, I think this has been a pretty effective item for us. The attendees are the licensee staff, the IC team, whoever. It doesn't have to be all the SMEs, but the key ones. But each IC or every IC, however many you have, ought to attend it. And then from FERC, it'll be the RE and or the branch chief and the project engineer, and then the written branch member. I've attended a handful of them myself. So, occasionally I'll sit in on one if I can. And I've found them pretty informative. So don't want to make them too much work for people. FERC does lead it, but we do ask for the IC to give a summary presentation. And it doesn't have to be super detailed. We want you to summarize recommendations. We want you to tie the recommendations to PFMs, and we want you to present the DCERC recommendation. And then based on that, the priority and urgency of actions required. So we'll ask questions. I mean, our folks will have reviewed the initial or done our initial review of the report. So, you don't have to go through the entire summary of the project in that meeting. It's always helpful if I'm sitting in on it because usually I haven't done an initial review, but certainly that's not expected. And it helps speed things along for everybody. And then following that, we'll issue our initial review response letter. And then the licensee is going to submit their plan and schedule to address the IC recommendations. And we have, as you've seen, we have a lot of reports under final review. Our final review letter will indicate the following: accepted, conditionally accepted based on these comments. You got to revise your report based on these comments, or it's unacceptable, and you have to resubmit it. So once again, I wouldn't expect any unacceptables. Who knows, but I wouldn't expect it. And then this is the last slide. So some minor clarifications of guidance. We've identified it. The challenge I have right now is issuing anything is not possible. So I can't even update guidance right now. And that's based on executive orders and things like that. So we'll try to communicate, best practice type things. But in order for me to actually update a guideline, it's going to be a while, based on, the climate and any sort of moderation in issuances. Or if I'm able to convince the chairman to say, yeah, we need to revise this. So I'm going to make the case to OMB, and because right now it's any issuance, you got to delete 10 others. So I don't think FERC wants to just delete 10 guidelines or regulations. So it's kind of like, all right, we're still feeling it out on how that might work. So, all right. Well, with that, I think I've talked enough. So I'm going to let you all ask questions. And like I said, I'll be here. I can be here till 3 if there's enough questions. If not, we can end whenever. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Much appreciated. Your camera clicked off along the way. Now you're back. There you go. Okay, good stuff. So
I was trying to
there's
save bandwidth there.
no, smart move. All good. I wasn't sure what was part of the plan and what was not, so I It's all good. Okay. So there were quite a few questions in the chat here. I know Doug's been doing a great job responding to most, but not all. So maybe a good place to start is the chat. Let's take it from the bottom to the top just to make it easier to navigate. And then we could throw it open. So the last one submitted here comes from Mike, and I'm sure it's top of mind for most here. I'm not sure if you've got answers either, but how much staff loss have you had with recent early retirements and probationary employee eliminations, and how do you expect that to impact your review and approval times?
Yeah. I mean, we are in a hiring freeze, and we have not been allowed an exemption. So we're under a hiring freeze. So right now it is loss through attrition. We haven't had any mandatory cuts to us. But I can't predict the future. I don't know if that will or won't happen. I don't think it will, but who the heck knows? So we're trying to manage with who we have. We had 5 folks take the deferred resignation, which was the Elon Musk deal about if you say you're going to resign, you can stay on till September 30th or whatever and get paid. So we had 5 folks take that. And then we've had some others retire just normally, right? Ken Fearon, my deputy, retired at the end of March. Doug Johnson's going to be retiring at the end of April in Portland. So I am not able to backfill those positions right now. So that is a challenge. There's no doubt about it. We are trying to look through our processes. There's a few things I have to line up even before we do that, and I think we're close, but we're going to have to look at everything we're doing and try to reprioritize and maybe, streamline things that I wouldn't have ever wanted to do before. But that's kind of the world we're living in right now. So, we'll communicate the best we can as we go. But that's what I know today. Others have asked about regional office lease cancellations because that's made the news. We have had the Atlanta regional office lease canceled. We've had the New York regional office lease canceled by GSA/Doge. So what I've been telling licensees is that our mission hasn't changed. We have the exact same number of dams we regulate and the same expectations on us. They haven't changed our mission. So I need that regional office model and I need the regional office presence. So we're working through some options internally here at FERC to try to make sure we can continue that. I'm relatively optimistic that we have some solutions. But in the meantime, there's a lot of unknowns that we're dealing with. And yeah, I'm sure it's not going to help us get these CAs reviewed quicker. But my hope is once I figure some of this out, then we're going to hit our process stuff internally and figure out, how we're going to get the work done in the way it needs to get done, so that we're not having things, hanging out even longer than it has. So,
yeah. I'm going to take the questions last to first, and notwithstanding the ones just put in, but I know Alex Bray just put one in related to this topic here. So just on that last theme there, Dave, relative to documents reports that are CE II and located at the regional offices. I don't know if you can.
Yeah. So, Atlanta and New York aren't closed. So their leases have been canceled, but not effective immediately. So those offices are still there. People are still going to them. So yeah, when and if, they get closed, we will work through that process with, how to facilitate document storage, document disposal, et cetera. But right now the regions are still all operating normally. So.
Okay. So going back here, Matt Mudo had put in a question. Key activity to prepare for CAs is revision of STIDs and creation of DPAs to meet the new Chapter 15 guidelines. Do you have statistics on how many STIDs slash DPAs have been accepted and or observations, lessons learned on this element?
Yeah, I don't have those handy today, Matt and everybody. But I will jot it down because we can uh, grab that info. But yeah, that is definitely a big item for you all. And I'll make a note that we're going to try to see what we have on that.
Yeah. Okay. I think Doug got the other ones here in the chat, as did I, at least on the administrative side. Okay, coming back down. Michael Carpenter, can you describe how FERC is using the DSRC rating?
Well, the idea there is it will help everyone with understanding the urgency of action at a project based on the CA process and the L2RA that's performed. So the IC team is responsible for determining that DCERC rating, and then using that, they also ought to recommend whatever needs to be done to address whatever needs to be addressed. So if it's a DCERC 2, which is kind of urgent, that means there's likely failure modes driving that rating. And then, a recommendation would be to do something about those failure modes, whether it's more analysis or actual intervention or modification, et cetera, right? So we're relying on the IC team to do an assessment on, what is the DCERC rating, and then how do the recommendations work into reducing that DCERC rating by being addressed, right? So it just rolls into the plan and schedule of the recommendations. But we did find one active failure mode at one CA last fall. So we had a big, we kind of short-circuited the whole DCERC rating at that point, but it really depends on the findings and what's driving things. But it is just part of the whole making the dam safety case for that project. If you give it a DCERC rating 2, that's not good. Doesn't mean the dam is failing, but it does mean things need to be done. And the IC team needs to be the lead on recommending what need to be done and how quickly. And any interim risk reduction measures as well. Those are always critical. At projects that have issues that have been identified.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so I think between you, Doug, and myself, that clears up all the questions in the chat. So I think we could throw it open here. If you've got thoughts or questions, maybe just put your hand up, then we'll call on you. Go, Brent. Go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate the feedback presentation. Kind of to tag on to that question on DCERC rating, if you do have a high rating at a dam, is FERC going to subsequently then prioritize reviews to address those? Because that's one of the things that's hard for us to understand as licensees is kind of how FERC prioritizes, review items when we submit them. I know you guys will focus on construction-related reviews and things like that, but that's kind of tough for us to understand how kind of those line up, or if there's a hierarchy of reviews.
Yeah, I would say we don't have a formally developed policy internally to say, we're going to prioritize our reviews based on DCERC. It certainly is important. It'll fall into the mix. You know, and I think the key is the communication and the understanding of the issue or issues. And yeah, we certainly, we can't get to everything right now. So yes, we have to prioritize. And we definitely will prioritize based on dam safety risk or concern as best we can. So I would say, let's, you know, if you have a DCERT two, I would hope we don't have any ones, but maybe we will. But a one or a two does warrant additional discussion between the regional office, headquarters, and the licensee to say, hey, you know, is this something that needs to be, you know, put to the front of the line? Or is it just, you know, man, this analysis is just not, we can't make heads or tails of it. So you got to prioritize that. And, you know, I mean, it really does depend on what the items are.
Great, thank you.
Dave, the questions, thoughts? Just buying some time to make sure people can get off of mute here, Dave.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. There you go. Here's Matt. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for taking the time. So a question on the part in the guidelines where for the purposes of allowing people to do a consecutive Part 12, you're treating a consulting firm as the same as a person, I guess. Is there any past experience or specific concern that's required that rule, that's backing that up? Because it does seem like it's limiting options in a field where you're getting a little more consolidation of talent, especially the kind you want for these very specialized analyses. I don't think you have as many single, sole proprietorships. They're going to be able to compete for Part 12. So it seems like cutting off large parts of the industry from being able to do a particular dam is a potential problem, especially as we move down the road on these and get more of these done. So any thoughts on why, what's the justification for treating a company as a person for this purpose?
Well, it does matter, the details. And I know of one that we denied, and it was the details of it. There may be ways that doesn't have to be the case. And I totally understand what you're saying. But we would prefer it not to be the case. If the licensee says, look, this is what we need for our project, and here's the firewalls we have, and, you know, this office has never touched this project, et cetera, et cetera. There might be ways we can work with the licensee on it. But like I said, the one example I'm keenly aware of, we just couldn't okay it. And you know, maybe it does become a bigger deal as time moves, as more of these are performed, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But yeah, I think, Matt, the only thing I could say to everybody is reach out, talk about the specifics of why, you know, you all believe that this is the right thing for your project. You know, the consecutive is, you know, to make sure we don't get stale. You know, and it is, you know, same with the company versus the individual, right? But I understand. I mean, that's why I try to say there's no red lines really. There's close, and this is one of the close as well, like the 180-day thing. But we're not trying to be unreasonable, but we're also trying not to make it the Wild West either. Because if we take that out, then everybody can just do everything, and that's not, I don't think, the best either. So.
Thanks, Dave. Next question, Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, David, thank you very much for your presentation. I was just wondering, so my company, we haven't gone through a CA process yet, but we have some coming up. In the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of people move companies, even just change professions. Have you had any issues with that? Just obviously because the CA is conducted over a fairly lengthy time frame. Certainly possible that someone would change jobs during that.
Yeah, we've had some CAs had to replace IC team members for various reasons, whether it's illness or retirement or who the heck knows, right? Sometimes there's just personal reasons. And that's to be expected. That's going to continue to happen. It's just then we need the new team member to be proposed or new members to cover. And that's the main thing. We can and we have replaced people even pretty close to the CA inspection timeframe. So it's important to be proactive as a licensee, to make sure that we have time to review, make sure that who you're proposing to replace, we're not going to have a lot of questions about their experience, because that's what takes time. Is if we don't know the person or the resume is not robust, it might be a little back and forth. But yeah, there's definitely a process that we have for replacing team members anywhere along the line.
All right, back over to the chat here. So Dave, just on the administration side, do you have any plans to post these slides on your website somewhere, just to make them public?
Yeah, I think we could do that. I don't. Yeah, we'll either post them or I don't know if the file's too big to send to you, but
Yeah. Okay. We'll
yeah,
figure it out.
I'm fine
Yeah.
with them being available. It's just right now, yeah, we'll figure that out. Maybe you
Okay.
and I could talk offline, Chris.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Next question from Ryan here. Do you anticipate or are you considering any changes to the routine inspection program or other aspects of the overall D2SI program to make FERC staff available for Part 12 participation / reviews?
Yes, that's all I can say
Right.
right now. We're considering everything.
Right. Jason, go ahead.
Hey, Dave, it's Jason with Brookfield. Just a quick question. We have a couple projects coming up where we've got some pretty significant investigations currently underway with and without boards. This could be structural FEM stuff or site-specific PMP stuff or a few interrelated things. And we have CAs coming up that are going to lay over those before those are complete. And I was just wondering, without getting into any specific questions, is there a general thoughts you have on having those types of projects with open-ended issues go through a CA?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we can talk specifics. I don't know if it'd be worth trying to switch a PI and a CA for something like that. I mean, we can consider those types of things if it makes sense, depending on the project, the urgency, and the importance of the project. I mean, I would prefer the CA to be as clean as we can get it, but is that just with the inventory everyone has, it's probably not going to be possible in all cases. But yeah, I mean, there's possible ways we could work through that, or it's just how it is, and it's not clean, and it just I don't know.
Thanks, Dave. Other questions, thoughts? Luke, go ahead.
Hey Dave, it seemed like a lot of this was helpful in indicating to licensees and consultant groups what they need to do to come prepared and where exceptions do lie and where they don't. And that's driving a lot of the timeline for the overall CA process. But if we stepped away from that and looked at the CAs themselves relative to like the complexity or size of a project, is FERC and the people involved, licensees and consultants, are they seeing the complexity and time commitment scale with the complexity of a project in a way that owners and consultants can use that to scale their cost estimates for the process?
Yeah, I mean, it is designed to be scalable, in that we do allow an IC team to be one person. I don't expect that to be common, but if you've got a high hazard dam with one house that could be impacted by a failure, it's concrete gravity structure, with on rock foundation. I mean, if it's really straightforward, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but yeah, I mean, we can definitely scale based on the project, the IC team composition and the, licensees can, ask for the L2RA waiver if appropriate. So projects that are low consequence, there may be a justification that the L2RA isn't necessary. And the regs do allow the waiver of that part of it. We're not going to suggest it. We're going to have the licensees come to us, but we would be willing to entertain those. I mean, that's why we wrote it in there. We do understand there are some pretty, straightforward projects with minimal consequence, but not none, that, probably don't need a 5-person IC team with an L2RA. So that's the scalable way. We're not, we can, the L2RA waiver and then just the size of the team.
Steve. Last questions, thoughts? Baram, go ahead. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I was on mute.
No worries.
Thank you
All
for the
good.
presentation again, Dave. I was wondering if you had experience with having more than one IC team, maybe several, dividing the work in between them. What that do with your, if you have come across that, what the efficiency of that would be?
No, we haven't. I don't think we probably would see that. Now we have had IC teams cross consulting firms, so multiple consulting firms comprising an IC team, but I don't think we'd have multiple IC teams on a project. I don't envision that.
Thanks, Dave. Question here in the chat from Ryan Grandin. For the CA waiver process, what's the general information needed to demonstrate low consequences?
That is going to depend on what the licensee wants to provide. It will depend on size of project, your dam break studies that you've done. Hazard class can come into play. I mean, we do require some of these on significant hazard projects, so that could be an indicator itself. So those, it really depends on project, and you'd have to talk to your consultants about it. you know, to see if there's a case that seems reasonable to try to make. You can even call up the regional engineer, and ask them if, you know, if it's something that could make sense. Because, I mean, to be honest, we're not looking for you all to spend more money than you need, and we're not looking for additional work for us right now, for sure. So where it makes sense from a dam safety standpoint to waive the L2RA, we're okay to do that. We're not going to waive the CAs though, the actual CAs. We can alternate PIs and CAs, so we can occasionally adjust that way. And there may be projects that we can concur with a licensee that only needs one CA, and maybe the one-time CA and then PIs from then on. You know, those are the type of things that we're willing to entertain. So.
Very good. All right. Doug picked up another question here in the chat, so I think he answered that there. Other questions, thoughts for Dave here? Dave, Gene, go ahead.
Dave, you actually touched on it a little bit there, of the possibility of doing your first CA and then potentially PIs from then on. I talked to one of the FERC engineers that where, you know, if no project features have changed and there's really no changes per se, no matter the size of the project, or maybe it does depend on the size of the project, how much do you anticipate that happening?
I don't know right now, Gene. A lot of it does depend on licensees as well, right? I mean, some licensees prefer or would prefer to do the CAs on any of their projects. Obviously, cost is a major consideration, of course, but still. But others, you know, if you guys can make the case, I mean, like I said, we're willing to entertain it. Doesn't mean we will accept it, but you know, we're willing to have the conversation. You know, really on any project, because you know, whether you believe me or not, we don't want you spending money that you don't need to spend, but we need you to spend the money you need to spend. So that's just how it is. So, you know.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dave.
Sure.
Steve, another one in the chat here. So this is related to dams classified as intermediate for hazard ratings, and waivers for dams classified as intermediate. Thoughts there?
Yeah, so I don't know of an intermediate. I'm assuming that means significant hazard. And if it doesn't, then what I say isn't correct anyway. But if it's significant hazard or even a low hazard, we do have some tall low hazards that fall under the Part 12D criteria. The waiver, like I said, would potentially be for the L2RA not having to be done, and or, you know, potentially a one-time CA for the project, depending on the project itself. You know, a project with a lot of problems, you know, we're not just going to say okay to that. So it you know, that comes into play too. I mean, we don't want dams failing. We don't want significant hazard dams failing. Rapidan last year in Minnesota was a significant hazard dam. It made the national news. It didn't kill anybody. It impacted a home that was occupied. So, but it took a long time to fail it. But still, you know, you know, a lot of things will come into our decision process, and those are the type of things that we'll consider. But I am saying, you know, we'll entertain it. We'll talk to you on the requests that you have.
Very good. Couple questions in the chat here. So is it better to have a consultant perform an analysis, so i.e. a foundation stability study on a surge tank prior to the CA, or wait and have it completed as part of the CA process?
I would say talk to the region on questions like that, and just because those are a lot of specifics, and I don't want to give a general answer on something like that. So talk to the region, lay out the issues, and then, they can give you some advice.
Okay, very good. And next one here, after the first CA is complete, when would the appropriate time be to have the discussion with FERC regarding waiving of the CA and performing PIs from there?
Well, I don't want the only thing you all taken away from this discussion is that we're going to waive CAs. That is not, I don't anticipate that being a large thing. So certainly there will be cases where it makes sense. But just because you do one doesn't mean you're never going to do any others if you ask. So I would say anytime you want to talk to the region is fine. And then we'll, often the REs will call me up and we'll talk through it. And then, we'll get back to you. So it really will be project dependent. And I don't expect it to be the norm. But we'll certainly, like I said, entertain it.
All right. Okay, and with 4 minutes to go here, last question I think is going to be given here to Christopher Springer. Chris, go ahead.
You might have already said this earlier, so I apologize if you did, but when this concludes, where would this video be uploaded to, or your slides? Where would I be able to find those?
Yeah, so I'll work that out with Dave and we'll put out an email. But you'll be able to get them. If anything, I'll just email them to you. But
Wonderful, thank you.
We'll figure it out. Yeah. Yeah. All right, Dave, did you want to put in just a plug for your USSD L2RA workshop coming up? I think it's on the 22nd. You were Doug.
Yeah, we're going to do a webinar next week. You can go to our webpage to find the details for it. We're also going to offer it separately. It's free to USSD members. I think there's a charge if you're not. So we're also going to offer it at another point free for whoever. But if you want to pay the charge to hear it next week, you can. But yeah, we're having the Riddim branch present that next week. It's the L2RA PFMA details. More details, better details than I gave today on stuff that we've been working through.
Super. And Dave, if you wanted that to be industry open, happy to host that again. So
sure, yeah, we'll talk and yep.
Sure. And just a pitch for the MHUG NHA Midwest Regional Meeting coming up here, April 29 and April 30. I know Kevin Griebenow is gonna present virtually to that live audience, so that's coming up at the end of the month. So
yeah, one thing I didn't mention that does, that reminds me. Currently, we are not allowed to travel for conferences or meetings like that. So we can do it virtually, or we can do it if it's local. So I was able to go to NHA 2 weeks ago because it was in DC and that didn't require travel for me.
Right.
But we are not allowed to travel. It is government wide. We're not allowed to travel for conferences or industry type meetings without grand justification up through the leadership of the agency. So I will not be able to get that done, I'm sure, for a lot of the upcoming meetings. That might moderate in the upcoming months, I hope. But for now, yeah, we're going to miss the USSD conference in May. Kevin can't travel to MHUG, so he's got to do it virtually. So it's just how it is right now.
Yep. And we'll do the best we can in the meantime. So all right. Well, thanks so much, Dave. Thanks, Doug, behind the scenes there in the chat. And thanks to your whole team there at D2SI, Dave. Much appreciated. And thanks to you all, the audience here, for sticking through. Much appreciated. And we'll put out notice just relative to where to get the slides, where to get the recording.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.